Hello and welcome to the Times of India. You're watching Global Pulse with me, Neha Khanna. And we have some big breaking news for you, ladies and gentlemen. Trump has done it again. Yes, he has raised the tariffs on India from 25% to 50%. The additional 25% is meant to be a punishment for India doing business with Russia. This now places us in the same category as Brazil as far as Trump tariffs go. For days now, Donald Trump has been lashing out at India in a highly unpresidential fashion over its ties with Russia and purchase of Russian oil. He has accused India of fueling the Russian war machine against Ukraine. But when he was reminded on Tuesday that his own country, the United States of America, has been doing business with Russia and importing uranium hexafluoride for its nuclear industry, palladium for its electric vehicle industry, fertilizers and chemicals, guess what happened? Trump had a momentary memory lapse, or shall we call it a sudden bout of selective amnesia. His reply to the question was, I don't know anything about that. I'll have to check and get back to you. The President of the United States doesn't know anything about the trade ties between his own country and Russia, a country he so loves to hate. Trump doesn't know, or would he rather bury his head in the sand and pretend no such thing exists because it's politically inconvenient, even embarrassing? By his own logic, Trump should be imposing sanctions on his own country. How is the US trade with Russia not fattening Putin's war coffers? How is his closest European friends' trade with Russia not fueling the Russian war machine against Ukraine? Remember the truth bomb dropped by India's External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar when he said what India buys from Russia in a month, Europe buys in an afternoon. Yes, he was referring to Europe's huge oil and gas imports from Russia. Is Trump considering imposing punitive tariffs on Europe too? Only one conclusion can be drawn from these incontrovertible facts. Hypocrisy, thy name is Donald Trump. Consider this. 3 years after Russian President Vladimir Putin launched his full-scale invasion of Ukraine, the United States still imports billions of dollars worth of Russian energy and commodities, including enriched uranium. Since January 2022, the US has imported $24.5 billion of Russian goods. In 2024 alone, Washington imported fertilizers worth $1.27 billion, uranium and plutonium worth $624 million, and palladium worth around $878 million from Moscow. Meanwhile, India's stance couldn't be clearer. It values its long-standing ties with Russia. It will not compromise on it under any threat. India will maintain its strategic autonomy under all circumstances. It will not be dictated to, and it will certainly not yield to any kind of bullying from Trump or anyone else. Just on Tuesday, in a television interview, Trump had threatened to very substantially raise the tariffs on India. Last week, he had slapped 25% tariffs on imports from India, one of the highest tariff figures for any country. And not content with that, he said he was going to impose a penalty on India for buying Russian oil, and he has gone ahead and done that today, taking the total tariffs on India from 25 to 50%. As Trump threatens India with tariff after tariff, calls the country a dead economy, and basically pours gasoline over India-US ties, a critical strategic relationship built painstakingly over several decades by successive governments with bipartisan support in both countries, there are some very important developments taking place in faraway Moscow. In what many observers see as a powerful message from New Delhi to Washington, India's National Security Advisor Ajit Doval is in Moscow today. Although Doval's visit had been scheduled in advance, it now has renewed urgency given Donald Trump's relentless tirade and tariff wars against India. The focus of this visit is on defense cooperation, though the escalating geopolitical tensions are expected to figure prominently in the talks. Discussions are likely to include talks on the delivery of the remaining S-400 missile systems that played an important role during the India-Pakistan conflict in Operation Sindoor in May this year. Also on the agenda, setting up maintenance infrastructure in India and exploring options for acquiring Russia's Su-57 fighter jets. Doval is expected to talk about India's stand on the US threats and tariffs and will also prepare for the visit of Russian President Vladimir Putin to India later this year for the annual summit with Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Foreign Minister Jaishankar is also expected to visit the Russian capital later this month. The Ministry of External Affairs has categorically stated that India's relations with Russia are based on mutual understanding and should not be judged by other countries. Russia too has hit back at Trump over his tariff threats to India, saying any sovereign nation must have the right to choose its trade partners. Significantly, at a time when India's national security advisor is in Moscow, so is US Special Envoy Steve Witkoff. He met with Russian President Vladimir Putin and other leaders, and the Ukraine war dominated the agenda. Of course, it's not just Indians. There are many Americans too who are shocked and disturbed, even squirming at Trump's frothing at the mouth. Former US Ambassador to the United Nations and Republican Nikki Haley has said India should not be buying oil from Russia, but China, an adversary and the #1 buyer of Russian and Iranian oil, got a 90-day tariff pause. Don't give China a pass and burn a relationship with a strong ally like India. But of course, Trump just doesn't seem to care. And here's another very significant development that deserves to be mentioned. Today, it was announced that Prime Minister Narendra Modi will visit China on the 31st of August to attend the SCO summit. This will be his first visit to China since 2019 and critically the first since the Galwan Valley clashes between the soldiers of India and China in 2020. Does this indicate a significant thaw in India-China ties? Isn't the timing quite significant given that India, China and multiple countries around the world are in Trump's line of fire with constant threats of trade tariffs every day? In fact, many are now beginning to wonder if Trump, with his relentless verbal onslaughts on foes and friends alike, is perhaps bringing India and China closer together and unintentionally helping the two neighbors with a fraught relationship overcome some of their recent tensions to unite against a common adversary. Then there are also questions being asked about a possible alignment of interests between India, Russia and China. Thanks to Trump swinging a wrecking ball, could we see an unlikely, informal alliance between these three countries? Remember, in diplomacy and geopolitics, there are no permanent friends or enemies, only permanent national interests. All right, let's put those very important questions to our panelists. Joining me on Global Pulse tonight is Michael Kugelman. He is Deputy Director, Asia Program and Senior Associate for South Asia at the Wilson Center. He joins us live from Washington, D.C. Also with us is Ambassador Pradeep Kapoor, former diplomat and former secretary in the government of India. Also with us tonight is Subhash Chandra Garg. He's former Finance and Economic Affairs Secretary in the government of India and an author as well. Gentlemen, a very warm welcome to you on what has been another very frosty day in India-US ties. I don't even know where to begin. Michael Kugelman, let me start with you, the American on the panel, somebody who watches India very closely. What does one say, Michael? From 25%, Trump has raised the tariffs on India to 50%, calling the additional 25% a penalty for doing business with Russia. Of course, it's another matter that when he is questioned about the United States trade with Russia, the president gets a sudden bout of selective amnesia and says, oh, I don't know anything about it. What is going on with Donald Trump, Michael Kugelman? Why is he acting like a pyromaniac who is hell-bent on burning this very critical India-US strategic relationship?
Yeah, it's a great question and one that we're all thinking about. You know, one of my first thoughts reading over this executive order announcing this 25% tariff is why not China? Why is India getting hit with this, but not China, which of course has been importing significant amounts of Russian oil, just like India? And that got me to thinking that I really think that for Trump, it's personal. I think that he is upset with India, with India's government, for a number of reasons. One being that India did not let him claim a role or did not let him take credit for a U.S. role in the India-Pakistan ceasefire. I also think that Trump is likely unhappy with Prime Minister Modi after the long phone call that the two leaders had some weeks ago, when, according to the Indian government readout, they spoke for a very long time, and Prime Minister Modi took a long time telling Trump how wrong he was about many things he was saying about his role in the ceasefire and so on. So I hate to use such a non-technical, non-academic explanation for what's going on here, but I do think with the president, he is just unhappy with India, and he is willing to take extra steps that he would not take even against a critical U.S. competitor, that being China, to try to send a message to India. Now, certainly, he's also trying to pressure Russia here. He is clearly very unhappy that Russia has not heeded his calls to stop fighting in Ukraine, and he probably hopes that by trying to pressure India to do less business with Russia, that Russia will get concerned and will be prepared to stop fighting in Ukraine. All of these assumptions are not accurate in my view. I don't see I don't see Putin deciding to stop fighting in Ukraine. But my point is that it really comes down to something personal. That Trump feels aggrieved by how he has been treated by India in recent weeks. He still refers to Prime Minister Modi as a friend, but I'm not hearing him say that as much as he was in previous weeks.
Well, I would say with friends like these, who needs enemies, really? And I'm sorry that I am describing your president in these terms, Michael. But, I think one has to agree with a lot of those people who say that you currently have a man-child in the White House who throws a tantrum at the drop of a hat, especially when he sees that the world is refusing to dance to his tunes. Poor Donald Trump does not get credit for quote unquote brokering a ceasefire between India and Pakistan. He throws a hissy fit. He gets very upset. Poor Donald Trump does not get a Nobel Peace Prize nomination from India, unlike from Pakistan and Netanyahu. He gets very upset with India and with Prime Minister Narendra Modi. And for many imagined slights, he decides to pour gasoline, as I keep saying, over this extremely critical strategic relationship that has been built by successive governments, by successive Indian prime ministers and US presidents over decades with bipartisan support in both countries. Would you say that this is the lowest point that India-US ties have hit since the post-Pokhran sanctions that were imposed by the Bill Clinton administration in 1998? Just how much back in history has Donald Trump taken us? How much of a setback is what he is currently doing to the India-US relationship? And frankly, is there any coming back from this? Do you believe the two sides can still sit across the table and calmly work out a trade deal? Or is that now just slipping away?
I think this is the lowest point that the relationship has reached over the last 2 decades of strategic partnership. I mean, this is clearly a low point. It's not a low point in the relationship on the whole. I mean, you'll recall there were some very dark days during the Cold War era, and indeed after India formally became a nuclear state. But this is the worst things have been over 2 decades. And if you look at how things were during the first Trump administration, things were pretty good. I mean, there were some trade tensions. There was something close to a mini trade war, but nothing like this. And I think that's clearly because the president is taking a much harder line on these issues. He's become even more brutally transactional than he was his first term. So whether things can be salvaged, yes, I do think they can be, just because, I mean, this is a relationship that is very multifaceted, and you've got many different tracks of cooperation that play out along many different fronts, not just government to government. I mean, you do have two private sectors that really want to work together, and clearly would be tremendously impacted by these tariffs if they go through. But I've been in the same room as a number of senior American and Indian industry leaders in recent weeks, and there is a genuine enthusiasm and optimism to work together. So if they can figure out a way to do that, to work around this tariff issue, that's great. But obviously, now that we're talking about the risk of 50% tariffs, that is catastrophic, and I think that could make it difficult for even the non-government to government channels of this relationship to pull through. Final point I'll make here is, I think the big question for the relationship moving forward is will it be held hostage they're held hostage by the whims of the president, because there's so many institutional linkages, so many shared interests and strategic convergences between the two countries. The State Department and the Defense Department, the U.S. intelligence community, they want to work with India, but clearly President Trump, with these decisions he's making, these incredibly impulsive and I would argue dangerous decisions he's making about tariffs, could imperil all of that. But can the relationship work around the what this one leader, the most powerful figure in the US and maybe the world, is trying to do here? That for me is the big question. Is it possible to navigate around the individual acts and that the president is taking? If not, then I think the relationship is in trouble.
I think the relationship is in very serious trouble because no less than the President of the United States of America is inflicting very serious damage on this critical relationship. Since you have only a few minutes with us on this show, Michael, I want to ask you a couple of critical questions. Number one, is there really any coming back from this as long as Donald Trump is in the White House? Or are we now barely 6 months into the Trump presidency, already staring at a situation where India will probably just need to ride out the rest of the 3.5 years and then hope perhaps for some sort of a turnaround in the relationship, which, as we both agree, is in a lot of trouble right now? One. Two, unintentionally, unknowingly, do you believe Trump may end up pushing India deeper into Russia's arms and also bringing adversaries India and China closer together?
Right. Well, I mean, in terms geopolitically, at least at this point, it looks like that is what the trajectory is. And we had seen India and China easing tensions or starting to ease tensions in the weeks and even months before Trump was reelected. But clearly, efforts have continued to pace. And I think purely on commercial levels, on trade levels, if India is facing these levels of tariffs from the U.S., it's going to have a very strong incentive to broaden its already sizable commercial relationship with China. And I think China would feel the same way. As for Russia, I mean, we know that India has long had that special relationship. And indeed, I think that Trump's tactics here are just going to drive India even closer into Russia's arms than it already is. Now, in terms of what happens, we still have 3.5 more years of President Trump. This is the very early point of his term. That's a long time to wait something out. So I would argue that we could look at several signposts here that can make it easier for us to figure out what the chances are that this relationship can get through this very difficult moment. One, will the two sides actually come back together to try to conclude a deal? We can't rule that out. They had been negotiating for many months. Of course, things did not end up with a deal. You had the worst possible outcome possible. But I do think that, if temperatures cool sufficiently in the weeks and months ahead, maybe there would want to be a desire to come back together and negotiate a deal, though I would argue that India clearly would not be willing to make many more concessions, given all of the concessions it's already made. Second thing I look to, moving a bit further ahead, Quad Summit. There's supposed to be a Quad Summit, Leader Summit hosted by India this year. Will it happen? Will President Trump be willing to attend? What does he think about the Quad? If he says he's done with the Quad, he doesn't want to have anything to do with it, that would be a really significant blow to the relationship, would make it even more difficult to come together. So I think those are some things to look out for over the next few months.
Well, I think you were absolutely right when you said at the outset that it seems very personal this time. It doesn't look like this is entirely about trade. But before we let you go, finally, Michael, what's with Trump's newfound love for Pakistan, a country that we all know hid Osama bin Laden, the architect and mastermind of 9/11, for so many years? Self styled Field Marshal Asim Munir was treated as a state guest at the White House. Then Pakistan turns around and nominates him for a Nobel Peace Prize. What's going on there? Is it just a coincidence that Donald Trump's family seems to be personally and directly involved in a cryptocurrency deal that we are told is being monitored and protected by none other than Asim Munir himself? What explains Trump's newfound love for Pakistan, a country that
Yeah, I
exports
think with
terror to all parts of the world?
When it comes to President Trump and his approach to foreign policy and diplomacy, it's not about who he loves, it's about what he can get. And I think that he has been convinced by Pakistan that Pakistan can offer him, on a very transactional level, the types of things that he wants. I think one has to credit Pakistan here for successfully pitching itself to the Trump administration as a partner on the things that this administration wants to pursue globally, not just in Pakistan. So critical minerals, Pakistan had hosted a major minerals forum several months ago. You had a senior U.S. senior U.S. government presence there. Crypto, Pakistan had nothing going with crypto until soon after the administration came into power, and suddenly Pakistan launched the Crypto Council and said it's going to start legalizing crypto, and it very cleverly tapped into Trump's emphasis on personal and family links by engaging with this American crypto company that has Trump's sons as a part of it. So I think that Pakistan has played the game effectively with Trump and has been able to really pitch itself on the most transactional levels possible as a partner. And it's just obviously a very different approach that India and most other countries have taken. I would say this, though, we shouldn't overstate this renaissance in U.S.-Pakistan ties, because we can't necessarily, if President Trump thinks he wants to pursue something now, he may not want to pursue it tomorrow once he realizes that all these critical minerals in Pakistan are in areas that are very vulnerable to terrorism, making things difficult for the U.S. in
He's
terms of
hoping to
investment.
find
They want to back
oil
away.
reserves in Pakistan, for crying out loud.
Yeah, and last year Pakistani officials announced they'd made a massive oil and gas discovery, and I suspect that Pakistani officials planted that seed in the minds of Trump administration officials, and their ears perked up, so to speak. It's all very notional. It's all very aspirational. I don't think we should read too much into that oil deal just yet.
Frankly, it's not just aspirational and notional. I think it's quite comical. Um, Call it a tragic comedy if you like. Good luck to Donald Trump finding those oil reserves in Pakistan. Show me the money, what's in it for me. I think this is a president who has taken transactionalism to a whole new and very, very dangerous level. And yes, it's just 6 months into the Trump presidency, and the man is already swinging a wrecking ball. I think the remaining 3.5 years of his term increasingly look like a nightmare for the world. Michael Kugelman, thank you so much for sharing your perspective with us on Global Pulse tonight. Great to have you on the show.
Thanks for having me.
All right, let me now go across to my other guests, and thank you so much, gentlemen, for your patience. Ambassador Pradeep Kapoor, let me come to you, sir. What is going on with Donald Trump? The man seems to have taken India's denial about his involvement in a ceasefire between India and Pakistan to heart, and very personally. The poor man was desperately hoping for a Nobel Peace Prize, and it looks like Prime Minister Modi and his government have dashed his hopes, and he will not stand for it. So what does he decide to do? What he does best: to use trade as a weapon. And he's decided to punish India for it. Is that what's going on here with Donald Trump? The tariffs just keep going up, 25%, 50%, maybe it'll be 150% tomorrow, who knows? Sir, could you unmute yourself? Go ahead, sir. I
thought
think
I was unmuted.
yes.
I
Now we
thought I
can
was
hear.
unmuted. Can you hear me? Okay.
Now we can hear you. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Neha. It's a very important issue for US. It's a very important issue for India, and it's a very important issue for the world. Because if I were to, sit back and reflect upon it, the US-India relationship is a very important relationship. Uh, in terms of the geopolitical impact, in terms of the geostrategic relevance, in terms of the defense relationship, in terms of our, common shared platforms, common shared interest in democracy, common shared interest in promoting the world economic growth. So, plus the Indian diaspora in the US is a very important diaspora. I think it's currently passing through a difficult phase, but it will find an equilibrium very soon once the Ukraine-Russia war is out of his sort of spectrum or his radar, and then suddenly we will find things get a lot better with India. But in the meantime, what is going to happen is India is going to also get closer to Russia, get closer to China, and let the U.S. administration know that we also have our ideas, we also have our thoughts, we also have our views on geopolitics, on national interest. So it's going to create a lot of difficulties for a short amount of time. I think it's not going to be too long lasting because, as we have seen with so many issues with the current US administration, the policies change very rapidly. And in the case of 25% becoming 50%, as they say, infinity plus one is still infinity, or infinity plus infinity is still infinity. So, the impact which the Indian diaspora has in the US today, the influence which it has, is very significant. At some stage, again, they will be able to, speak to many people in the US administration that this is more counterproductive and more damaging to the US in the long term. Because if the US economy, as see, most of the people here in the US, their primary interest, since they do not believe in rebirth, is this life. And if anything goes wrong with their purchasing power, with their economy, with their inflation, with their cost of goods, with their cost of living, then they are very, very eager to vote out that particular government. Now, the elections are due again in November 2026, the midterm elections for the House, as it happens every 2 years. And if that happens, and one third of the Senate also gets voted. So, if during that time the economy tanks, which there is a very good possibility of it tanking, because the only way that the economy can go ahead strongly is with one of the strongest drivers of the global economy, which is India. So, if there is a good economic partnership and a good trade partnership with India, because the manufacturing in the US has gone down. Now, what can pull it up is again a very good relationship with India. So, once those
Yes.
saner voices prevail in the administration and in the inner circle of Trump, which will happen because there are a lot of very strong proponents of very strong US India ties within the inner circle. So ultimately, it's going to happen. It may be sooner rather than later, but I would rather wait and see because the impact on the US is going to be probably far worse than the impact on India. Back to you, Neha.
Okay, that's an interesting take. Renowned strategic affairs analyst Sushant Sareen also joins us on Global Pulse on a day when Trump has given us yet more breaking news. I will go across to Mr. Sareen in just a moment. Before that, I want to go to Subhash Chandra Garg. Mr. Garg has been waiting very patiently since the start of the show. Mr. Garg, what's going on here? Is Trump a frustrated man who had promised to end all wars, especially the Russia Ukraine war, within 24 hours of being re elected to the White House? And yet, 6 months into his presidency, he realizes that it is far tougher than he had thought. And now he just seems to be venting his anger and frustration on India, an old friend and ally of Russia, because he can't seem to do much to push Putin. What do you make of, the moves, the rash moves that Donald Trump is making in the process? Many would say wrecking the India-US relationship.
So, Neha, what Trump is doing, the way he is acting, is for Trump's to do. I think what is more important for us to discuss is what we are doing. What did we understand the man? Did we not understand the man? Did we know what our interests are? Did we know how he is likely to act in the face of what we will do? And now, when he is acting in a manner which is very prejudicial to us, if we're talking in terms of that whether he'll be able to push us to China or towards Russia, is it who we are in charge or somebody else? That even our relationship with China or Russia should be decided by somebody else, or should we decide it? I think I have very strong issues with our inability to understand Trump's personality and way of doing business. In April, when Trump announced that he will have reciprocal tariffs, it was 26%, which was set for India. Before that, in February, our Prime Minister went there and tried to do a deal. Please, Trump, and do a deal with him. There was some timetable was also set in. Now, when it was floundering, so to say, in April, and the instead of deal, you being slapped with 26% tariff. What was we should have done? Why were we holding so many rounds of um, dialogue and discussion with his and his team? What were we trying to get? I think we were trying to get. We thought we are smart guys, and we will be able to get a deal from Trump, which will exempt our agriculture, which will exempt our no-go areas, and we will be able to have much lesser tariff from him. Now, anyone who did this kind of assessment that he will be able to get this kind of deal from Trump and invested so much time, if I rather wasted so much time, and now when he has turned around and said, you are not going to get what you wanted to get, and instead of 26%, you had 25% plus 25%, because in the meantime, I found another reason to bash you up, which is that you are buying Russian oil, which
Yes.
he knew it all along, or we also knew all along. So look carefully what is the way we are running our policy, the way we are trying to negotiate for us, for our country. I think we have done a very bad job. Now let me come to the next aspect of it. The statement issued by the foreign ministry a day before, it exposes the so-called hypocrisy of Trump.
Absolutely.
Knowing, no, but it also exposes our poor understanding, our superficial understanding. Why are we trying to call United States or Trump a hypocrite? What are we going to get out of it by
You're saying
calling?
that, even when he goes on hurling insults at us, we need to be extremely polite towards him. But on a more serious note,
No,
sir,
not
I'm
at
sorry to
all.
butt in here.
No, no,
I have
no,
a
not
counter.
at all.
I have a counter question for you, sir. I have to play the
Yes.
devil's advocate. You are saying that we have mishandled it from the beginning. Perhaps those who've been at the center of these negotiations never quite understood who they were dealing with. While I agree that from day one, it has been known that Trump is mercurial, he is transactional, he is unpredictable. But my point simply is, sir, are you suggesting that India should not have engaged in these trade talks at all? 5 rounds have taken place. Yes, there are no go areas like agriculture and dairy that India does not want to open up, and Trump is obviously very unhappy about that. But are you really suggesting that India should not have had those trade talks at all? And are you completely pessimistic now about the outcome of these talks? Do you believe there will be no trade deal between India and the United States?
See, anyone who understood India's trade interests, India's economic interest, would have understood even in April and March that a deal with Trump is or was impossible. He would have never, I can explain to you on all the four fronts on which the others have got or have been forced to do deal with. The kind of tariffs which you will permit for American goods, the type of tariffs Indian goods would be subject to, the kind of goods you would buy from them, aircrafts and others, the kind of investments you would make. On none of those fronts you were in a position to offer or do a deal. And therefore, if we had invested time or wasted time for 4 months, we were trying to chase a chimera. It was an impossible deal right from the beginning. That is why I'm saying now to your other question about other remark, I'm not a pessimistic. I'm a very realistic. I wouldn't have wasted time 4 months like this, knowing this. I would have done alternative that with this guy
Share
it is
that
impossible.
alternative with us, sir. Share that alternative
Yeah,
with
then
us.
of course there are, and again we are hurting ourselves. Why did in this statement yesterday did why did we target EU? Why did we try to shame them? EU is our solution. EU is part of our solution, and we are unnecessarily hurting us by targeting EU also. I think the kind of policy we are running at this moment is really very immature. It's
Okay.
not. And now what, if you go this way, what you
Hmm.
will find is that you will neither have interest or served with the United States. You will run foul with EU and others. And if you are forced to go into the Chinese and the Russian lap with this
Hmm.
kind of status, you will be hurt there also. You think China will give you a deal? China will take
Okay.
care of you. Right. So I
No,
think
I agree that, whether it is trade wars, whether it's military conflict, India is on its own. I think that was made very clear to us,
it
especially
could be on its
during
own. It is
Operation
not on its
Sindoor.
own.
Uh,
Thank you.
okay. Interesting take. Honestly, but in my view, and I do not speak for the government of India or the Ministry of External Affairs, I don't think we were targeting the European Union. What we were doing was to call out Donald Trump's hypocrisy and double standards, and to say that, as Jaishankar has said, what India buys from Russia in a month, Europe buys in an afternoon. And when asked what about US's own trade with Russia, Donald Trump's reply was, I don't know anything about it. So I guess what India is trying to say is sauce for the goose has to be sauce for the gander. But then, yes, it is Donald Trump. I guess it really doesn't matter how many times you shame him. Let me now take this to Sareen. Sushant Sareen, what is going on with Donald Trump? I my hair will grow gray asking this question night after night on my show. Is are we talking about a man child sitting in the White House who's throwing a hissy fit because he did not get what he wanted? Poor Trump is upset that he did not get credit from India for the ceasefire between India and Pakistan. Poor Trump is very upset that India did not nominate him for a Nobel Peace Prize. Poor Trump is very upset with the statement made by Prime Minister Narendra Modi and EM Jaishankar in Parliament. What is going on here with Donald Trump? How should India react at this point in time? Because, frankly, to even say that what he is doing is extremely provocative would be an understatement.
So, Neha, I think the mistake you're making is that you're trying to analyze Donald Trump in the realm of the rational. And quite clearly, there is nothing rational about the man anymore. Now, it's very easy for Mr. Garg to, pick holes that why were we negotiating him and we should have gone to the EU. Perhaps he doesn't know the EU is also threatening sanctions on India and is coming out with a law to sanction India for buying Russian oil, even though they are buying Russian oil and gas. And according to these white folk, it seems that it's only the Indian purchases of Russian energy which is fueling the war. The energy which is bought by either China or Turkey or by the EU does not fuel the war. Now, this is again, if you are in the realm of the rational, it sounds bizarre. But if you are in the realm of the irrational, it makes perfect sense. Uh,
Yes.
so we were playing this game and we were negotiating in good faith, and we actually believed that we will be able to get a deal. After all, if everybody says Trump is transactional, and the idea is that because he's transactional, there will be some things we will give into and some things we will expect in return or some carve outs, which is how trade deals are often struck. Now, you know, a lot of people are talking about whatever trade deal was being negotiated uh, because they don't know what are the facts on the ground. From what I have heard, and this is not from people in the government, because I don't find it worthwhile talking to anybody in the government. These are people who have been involved at different levels, including in the private sector, with very deep stakes in what was happening. And again, not from Indian companies. Uh, the deal was a done deal. We had negotiated a deal and we had agreed to, or we had shown a degree of flexibility that the Americans never imagined we would. And apparently, the American trade negotiators were extremely pleased by the deal that we had signed. Uh, and when this deal goes into Trump's desk, he simply throws a hissy, unhinged fit and says that it's not acceptable to him. Now, what do you do? Do you compromise on your vital interests, on the livelihoods of millions or hundreds of millions of people in India, simply because you need to suck up to somebody like a Donald Trump? I don't think that's an option. So quite clearly, we did what we had to do. He has done what he has done. Now, I'm not, I'm 100% sure that this will prove extremely expensive for us. It'll hurt us hell of a lot. And that's bound to happen. But I find it bizarre for anybody to argue that even the statement, which was a very measured statement that we issued about 2 days back, when these tariffs were imposed upon us, that we should not have done it because it will rile up Trump, right? The point is that out here in India, the kind of environment we are living in, if you say even a measured thing as a
Yeah.
pushback, you are doing something really wrong. And if you don't say anything, you are again, you are damned if you do and you are damned if you don't. Now, clearly, you cannot expect a government in India to simply take everything lying down. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, there are people within India who think that the statement that was issued 2 days back, uh, was very mealy mouthed, that we should have hit them harder. There are others who feel that, okay, fine, you're trying to keep the negotiations going. And apparently, the negotiations are still happening. It's not as the negotiations are broken off. So clearly, something is happening on the background, and whether that actually comes to fruition or not, we don't know. But we should imagine that it will not, for the sake of argument. Now, the choice before the government in India is that, look, at 50% tariff, you cannot do trade with the United States. Trade is dead, right? For all practical purposes, apart from those products which have been exempted from these tariffs, everything else is dead. You are not going to be able to export a single damn thing to the Americans, in which those tariffs are going to be imposed. So now you are in a state, now you have to start thinking about this, that should you then say that, okay, fine, I will not export anything to the United States, but I will not impose tariffs on US commodities, which I was already importing from them, or should you retaliate? Now, one view can be that, okay, fine, since trade is already dead, then you might as well impose 50% tariffs on the US on a entire range of goods. And Trump has threatened that the moment you do that, I will ramp up my tariffs. Let him ramp it up. Now, it
Exactly.
doesn't matter whether it's 50%, 100, 500, 1,000, 5,000, 1,000,000%, because trade is not going to happen at 50% and it's not going to happen at 500%, right? So then you say, okay, fine, we'll grin and bear it, but the same cost will also be imposed upon the other guy. Or you can say, okay, fine, we'll hold our horses for some time. Let us see how the negotiations, apparently last week of August, there is another round of negotiations to take place. Look, negotiations are worth nothing, because at the end of the day, even when you do a deal with the Americans under this particular administration, you don't know whether the deal is going to be acceptable, even though it's a done deal, or the guy
Yes.
will wake up the next day and simply go ballistic and say, no, I don't accept it, or I want to change the goalpost. Now,
Exactly.
quite clear,
Yes.
you're dealing with, like I said, a unhinged character, who
Yes.
doesn't listen to the advice of his advisors. And I was earlier hearing that people are going to try and convince him to not do what he is doing. I'm not so sure if he even listens to any advice from any of the advisors. And the system in the US right now is that nobody wants to fall foul of Donald Trump, right? And people who are in the
Absolutely. I don't think
nobody's going to
anybody
say
has
anything.
the courage to speak truth to Donald Trump. I don't think anybody has the courage to tell him the emperor has no clothes. So, Shant Sareen, just hold that thought for a minute, because we have India's first official response to Donald Trump's imposition of an additional 25% tariff on India, which has now gone up to 100%. India has said the United States has in recent days targeted India's oil imports from Russia. We've already made clear our position on these issues, including the fact that our imports are based on market factors and done with the overall objective of ensuring the energy security of 1.4 billion people of India. It's therefore extremely unfortunate that the US should choose to impose additional tariffs on India for actions that several other countries are also taking in their own national interest. We reiterate that these actions are unfair, unjustified and unreasonable. India will take all necessary actions to protect its national interests. I want to ask both my guests one simple question. First, Sushant Sareen, to you, and then to the ambassador. How much longer can India be expected to exercise restraint as it has done so far? Is it time to retaliate? Of course, we know what Trump is going to do if we retaliate. He said, I'm going to slap on you as many tariffs as I want, but don't you dare retaliate. I will make it a lot worse for you. Where do we go from here? What are India's options?
So I think, Neha, we have about 21 days, 3 weeks before the penalties start kicking in. So right now we are at 25% tariff, and then we go on to 50%. So we have, say, a 3 week period. Now, if some kind of a deal is worked out in that period, well and good. If it doesn't happen, then, like I said, you have two options. One is that you say, okay, fine, since trade is not going to take place, I'm not going to take this lying down. I'm going to hit back, and I'm going to, retaliate with similar tariffs on the United States. And I am going to tell the United States that because the US is dealing with Pakistan, I am imposing a penalty on their products, right? So it doesn't matter, right? Because if he can impose a penalty because you're buying Russian oil, you say that because the US is dealing with Pakistan and they're not giving up their relationship with Pakistan, I'm imposing such and such tariff on them. Obviously, it means that you are into a situation where your economic relationship is bust completely. It'll have a major impact. I think people who are saying that it won't have a major impact are not realizing that this is not going to stop with the Americans. The Europeans are also going to do something similar going forward, right? So it's quite clear that the West is going to be working together and going to be ganging up on India. They don't have the testicular fortitude to do it with Turkey or to do it with China or with some of the other countries. But they think that we are pushovers. They'll try and do it to us. So I think we need to start preparing for the worst case scenarios and see how we can best manage in this particular thing. But look, one is the economic pain that we will have to undergo. And
Yes.
it will be substantial because Neha, people forget that almost 50%, even more probably now, of our GDP comes from foreign trade. So we must keep that into account. We are a little vulnerable on the external front. That is one part of it. The second part of it is that we don't know how this whole sanctions regime will progress. Tomorrow they could say that, okay, fine, you are sitting on $700 billion of foreign exchange reserves. We are going to impound those. They've done it, right? They've done it with the Russians. They've done it with some other countries. How do you know they will not do something similar? So perhaps it's about time we start, hedging these bets as well. And finally,
Okay.
we need to look at the security and the strategic perspective, because that is also going to have an impact on what is happening with India. You suddenly see the Pakistanis getting spring in their feet and think that they have the Americans on their back, they have the Chinese on their back, and they can mess around with us. So, if I was somebody who was going to advise the prime minister, which hopefully I will never be, I would say that you really need to start keeping your powder dry and make sure that you let everybody know where they get off, and that you are going to willing to go to any extent, and by any extent, I'm saying any extent,
Any
to
extent.
protect.
Oh,
The,
militarily, we displayed that during Operation Sindoor. How far can we
no, I'm saying
do
far
this when it comes to economic warfare? How far can we go, especially where Trump is concerned, where the United States is concerned? You make an interesting point, even though we don't discuss domestic politics on this show, just for the benefit of our viewers, let me tell you that Rahul Gandhi has also given an official reaction to Trump's decision and said Trump's 50% tariff is economic blackmail, an attempt to bully India into an unfair trade deal. Prime Minister Modi better not let his weakness override the interests of the Indian people. Let me take this back to Ambassador Pradeep Kapoor. Ambassador Kapoor, Sushant Sareen says India needs to keep its powder dry. My question is really, what are our options right now? Because you sounded quite optimistic earlier, sir, but Sushant Sareen and many others say, let's get real. This is going to hurt us. 50% tariffs are no joke, and it could get worse in the coming days. Who knows what Trump is going to do next? Who knows what the European Union might do next?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Please go ahead.
So I think that the Indian economy is far more resilient than the US economy. First, we have gone through such situations earlier after the nuclear explosion, for example, when the entire Western world ganged up and tried to sanction India. Our people are much sturdier in terms of facing hardships. Americans are not easy people in terms of being able to face hardships. They react very quickly, they are transactional. They see their economic difficulties and they react to it immediately. And November 2026, as I said earlier, is not far off. It's just over a year away. Once the US economy starts tanking, the poll numbers for the Republicans start tanking, the poll numbers for Trump start tanking, because the US economy is not going to be doing too well with all these tariffs with so many countries. Now, for one country to create enemies out of so many countries is not going to be an easy sort of walk through later. It's going to create a lot of difficulties. If you have depended totally on imports from other countries, including China, for all the items that I buy from Amazon or from the shops here, 90% of them are made in China. Then there are other countries. So the manufacturing in the US has gone down to abysmal levels. If you have to increase manufacturing, if you have to support the MSME sector, if you have to revive the economy, if we have to give the power back to the American consumer, they have lost their skills of manufacturing. How are they going to get back those skills? Some of the biggest employers in the US are the Indian diaspora. Now, for all these reasons and more, India has to just hold its horses. It does not have to retaliate. We have done that earlier, even with the visa regime. When the Americans, tried to say that it'll take a year or 2 years or 3 years for a visa appointment for US visa for Indians, people went to the Ministry of External Affairs in India saying that please issue reciprocal sanctions on the Americans getting visas for India. What did the government of India say? What did the Ministry of External Affairs say? No, we will not do that. We will continue with our policies for visas for Americans as earlier. Visa is a sovereign issue of every country. Let them do what they want to decide. People in the US were flabbergasted. When I talked to the people in the White House, they didn't know how to react. They were shocked. They thought that India would come, asking to put it on the bilateral agenda, asking to have some rational measures instituted to fasten the pace of issues of visa. India did no such thing. Similarly, for this, now when you have touched 50% tariffs already, it is like a very difficult situation for US and a very difficult situation for India, because Indian technology in the US and Indian American technology in India are both very important factors. And for India, for its development trajectory, India itself is a very big consumer of the output it produces. So it is not so dependent on exports as the US is dependent on imports. India is not dependent on imports either to that extent, except for oil and stuff like that.
Okay, but
Now,
Ambassador, I hope you've noticed that Trump actually is showing far greater patience and respect towards an adversary like China compared to how it's treating a so-called friend like India. But since I'm running out of time, Sushant Sareen, I want to ask you a few questions. I understand that the ambassador wants to take an optimistic view of things. To me, it looks like a very grim situation. Hoping that the Republicans sort of slip in the midterms next year, hoping that the American economy tumbles. These are just too many imponderables, for India to count on in a situation where you're faced with a massive challenge such as this. Much as I would like to believe that India should and can just ride out the remaining 3.5 years of the Trump presidency, and then we can hope for normalcy to come back in this relationship. Fact is, it's an incredibly long period of time that you're talking about, and it will be an incredibly long period of pain and hardship for the Indian economy. How do you really see that panning out? India should not bend the knee. India should not retaliate. Really, what are India's options here? As I keep saying over and over again. Also, Sushant Sareen, Prime Minister Modi will be in China for the ASEO summit on the 31st of August. As we speak, India's National Security Advisor Ajit Doval is in Moscow. Do you believe there is a strong chance that Trump, without even realizing it, ends up bringing India, Russia, and China closer together? Or again, is that too romanticized a view?
Look, this whole thing about, we might want to do business with the Chinese, but do the Chinese want to do business with us, and at what terms? So I think let's not get ahead of ourselves on an India-China rapprochement. We have not seen any real signals from the Chinese. We've seen the Chinese troll the Americans using India as bait, but nothing more than that. So I think we need to be careful on that. That is one. The second thing is that, Ambassador Saab is talking about India's resilience and all of that. I hope we will see that again. Uh, but remember that, when the earlier sanctions were imposed post nuclear time, one, India's GDP was only about 10-15% from foreign trade. We were still not, that much dependent on foreign trade. Today, it is, like I said, it's 50 to 60% of your GDP is foreign trade. Okay. And we are not only just talking about problems with the United States, our largest trading partner, we are also cannot discount the possibility of the Europeans getting onto the American bandwagon to pressure us. And basically, what these white folk are trying to do is make us a subservient vassal state. Now, that is our choice whether we want to
Exactly.
go down that road, right? The third thing is that please remember that you were dealing with rational regimes in the US. Today you're not dealing with a rational regime, and this thing that okay, in a year and a half maybe this guy will lose the election, the midterm poll, and there'll be some balance of power restored, or at least 3.5 years from now he won't be there anymore. How do we know that he is not there, some other mad maga character comes and replaces him? Then are we going
There
to
are
wait
some
for
who
7?
actually believe J.D. Vance could be worse than Donald Trump. I don't know.
Exactly. And our problem is that because JD Vance has an Indian wife, we think he'll be well disposed towards India. I don't know where our bureaucrats get these kind of notions. There was a time on Pakistan we would think, oh, this guy's a general, because he drinks whiskey, he must be a liberal and secular person. Because he wears a three-piece, he must be a liberal and secular person. The kind of mindlessness that, or because he's nice to us, he invited my family to his house, or we meet his wife and his children come to our house, he must be a nice guy. He's not, damn it. So, the kind of these shibboleths that we have in our mind on the basis of which we make policy is crazy. So I personally think we need to really rethink this entire thing. Maybe there can be some rebalancing. I don't know. Maybe some kind of a detente with China, if it's possible. I have some serious doubts on that. Uh, so at end of the day, I think this is a golden opportunity for the government in India, and I don't think we will take it because we are so obtuse and we are always looking for some kind of things to work out in our favor. We really need to bring in serious reform in our economy. We need to end this Babu Raj, this Inspector Raj, which is strangulating the economy, which is eating the vitals of the economy. The bureaucrats and the politicians are becoming rich, and the poor businessman is being has to go through the hoops, to even run his business properly. You have municipal fellows coming in and harassing them. You have tax guys coming in and harassing them. You have the police guys coming in and harassing them. You have the environmentalists coming in and harassing them. And if all of that is not enough, you have the National Green Tribunal coming in and harassing people. Please free the economy. Let it flourish. Let it flower. Right now, we really need to reform our system. Will the bureaucracy allow it? I don't think so. Do the politicians have the vision to say, okay, fine, this is a serious challenge to India's security, to India's economic security, to our political and strategic security? We really need to be on our own feet. We need to emerge as a strong economy which other people want to do business with and who cannot hold us hostage. Do we have that
Absolutely.
foresight? And I would imagine that in the next 4 weeks or thereabouts, we will see the first telltale signs. Will we see only lectures and grandstanding and, narebazi, or will we
Yes.
see actual policy measures being taken to unleash the productive potential of the Indian economy, to reform
Yes.
our education system, to create conditions that if H1B visa holders are coming back to India, we have jobs
They
for
should have
them.
opportunities here.
We
And Sushant
thing.
Sareen, economic reforms. Yes.
One thing, yeah, last thing. Please stop this business of linking the salaries of the world's topmost scientists to the salary which a goddamn cabinet secretary gets. A cabinet secretary contributes nothing to this country. The scientist contributes hell of a lot to this country. If you are getting people in DRDO and various other institutions, please give them the salaries they deserve and the lifestyles they deserve rather than linking it
Excellent
up
point.
with some IAS officer.
Excellent point. Economic reforms cannot remain on
I
paper. It is time we implemented these reforms. And Sushant Sareen, ease of doing business can no longer just be a slogan. Final question, Sushant, to you and to the
I
ambassador.
sure I have to go. I'm so
Just
sorry.
in one sentence, is this the
I never
lowest
said
that India US relationship has reached in the last 3 decades, you think?
clearly. I would imagine at least in this century, it's the lowest point in US relations, and I don't see how the trust factor, which has been severely breached, will ever come back in this relationship. That has been damaged for at least the next 2 decades.
2 decades. Strong statement. Thank you, Sushant Sareen. Thank you so much for your time. Ambassador Pradeep Kapoor, I'll give you the last word, sir. There are many who believe that Donald Trump has inflicted more damage on this relationship than any other American president in recent history, especially since the post-Pokhran sanctions of 1998 imposed by the Bill Clinton administration. How bad is it, sir? There are many who are saying it'll take us years, if not decades, to come back from this.
Well, Neha, as I told you earlier, it's a very delicate phase that the relationship is passing through. And what I would say is the following. In the elections which were held last year, the Bharatiya community in the US played a very important role in the 7 swing states. All the 7 swing states were won by Republicans and Donald Trump. One of the main reasons was that the Indians decided to come out in much larger numbers and vote for Trump because the Democrats had signed an agreement with the Islamic community on equal power sharing. That had made a lot of people to actively come out and vote. Now, if in the midterm elections, which is going to happen in November 2026, there are just a few seats which are lost by the Republicans and a few seats which are won by the Democrats, the Republicans will lose power both in the House of Congress and in the Senate. Now, once they lose power, Donald Trump becomes a lame duck president as of November
Okay.
2026. That sword is hanging on his head. He is not going to let that happen if he can control it. I'm not
Can I
sure whether he
remind
will be able
you,
to control it.
in a lighter vein, can I remind you that this is a man who says he would love to run for a third term, and who knows what he might do to the American Constitution with Trump. Anything is possible. But before I conclude, I have to say, Ambassador, I truly admire your optimism. Even on a grim day such as this, you certainly seem to be filled with hope. Let's see where this goes. For now, it certainly is a new low in the India-US relationship. Thanks very
Thank
much
you.
for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks to all my guests. Well, a huge day, or shall we say a massive low in the India-US relationship. Donald Trump raising the tariffs on India from 25 to 50%. India has responded saying it's extremely unfortunate, but we will continue to be guided by our national interest. What happens next? Could India retaliate with tariffs? Is a trade deal between India and the United States still possible? A lot of questions blowing in the wind. I guess we'll just have to wait to find out the answers. Thanks so much for watching. This is Neha Khanna signing off.